What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Long Game Podcast hosted by Thomas Kopelman and Jacob Turner. In each episode, you'll hear us break down financial topics that are relevant to you and your situation. Our goal is to help bring credible financial information to you in short, bite-sized episodes.
All opinions expressed on this show are for educational, informational, and entertainment purposes only. Nothing on the Long Game Podcast should be considered advice. Always consult with your team of professionals before making any decisions regarding your finances. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Long Game Podcast. I'm Jacob Turner here with my co-host Thomas Kopelman. And I think one of the things that Thomas and I talk a lot about throughout the course of the year is educating our clients on personal finance and understanding decisions that they make around their money. And a lot of that entails us going out and researching different ideas. But I think the thing that often gets lost is with the individuals that we have the opportunity to work with, some of the lessons that we get to learn along the way. And these are not just like always personal finance lessons, but Thomas and I are both building businesses that we hope to continue to grow in the future. And I think for me, I've been so struck this year by how many lessons I've learned just by working with business owners, both on the personal finance side, but also on the business side, but also on the relationship side and just life in general. So excited to dive into this topic today, Thomas.
Yeah, me too. And I'm going to let you go first. This was, we normally each pick a bunch of podcast episodes, and this was one you really, really wanted to do. And so I'm very curious to see what the first one that comes to your mind actually is, because I think that's probably what sparked this podcast.
Yeah. I think one thing that I've learned throughout the course of the year, and I feel like I knew this in a sense of like reading books on personal finance and understanding money, but there's no one right way to do it. And more so in terms of how people think about and view money. And I want to give a specific example, but if we have a business owner on one side who's essentially won the game, right? They have a business that's worth tens of millions of dollars, and their stance around potentially taking chips off the table might be completely different than a business owner who has very little enterprise value in their business and they're just cash flowing a bunch of money every single year. And they're like, I've completely won the game over here and I don't care about building the enterprise value at all. And there's no ego involved with me with my business. It's this little, they would call it this little small business over here, and they might be making $1 million. And then this guy over here is like, I've completely won the game, but like all I really care about is just like continuing to win the game in this enterprise value. And I think I would used to have told the person on the right-hand side that was making all that money, that had all this enterprise value, like, oh, you've got to take some chips off the table. But I think one thing that I've realized with money in general and with life in general is so much of it revolves around like how we view it and like what the purpose of it is. And typically the person that is building the company to build for this crazy enterprise value, like they actually care less about the money than the person that was cash flowing the business. Like they literally don't care. They're like, well, I was broke before this and I'd be fine if I was broke again. And look, I'm not saying that's a good personal financial decision, but it has really opened my eyes up in terms of how people think about money in general.
Yeah. I have a bunch to say on this because I've been thinking about some of the same things as well. And I think this one's interesting because I think de-risking or taking chips off the table can come in two ways. One is actually taking profits and investing elsewhere, right? Like if you just take every dollar of profit, reinvest back into your business, I think you do have to take chips off the table, but that does come in two ways, right? One of them is private equity or some type of other sale. It could be to employees, et cetera. The other one could just literally be, okay, let's stop reinvesting so much into my business and let's invest elsewhere. And I find myself liking that one a lot more because I do think there's so many people who have this goal of private equity sale. I'm going to take 10 to 25%. I'm going to take that money for myself. I don't have one person I've worked with who likes working where they work after they do it. Once they take private equity, once they sell part and they have new people who are helping run the business, the board that oversees them, most people go from I'm building this business I love to I have a job from people that I don't necessarily love. And so I think there's a few takeaways there. I think one is think about that, right? Like, what is your goal, right? Is it to take money off the table? And sometimes you do have to do this, right? Sometimes you do need to do this to scale. Sometimes you do need to bring more people in. Sometimes this is the only way to potentially take some winnings. And sometimes you have to do that. And other times you don't, right? Like you're just pursuing it. It's cool to talk about that you're a private equity backed business, et cetera. So I would definitely think about what you want because you can't go backwards, right? You're not going to all of a sudden be able to get private equity out. You're not going to be able to go back to those early days of building the business. So like make sure that that route or that decision is actually right for you. It's not an ego play.
Hmm. I think that's good. I think it goes back to something that we talk about a lot with clients, and it's understanding what's really important to them because oftentimes people start a business, right? A lot of the business owners that we work with, like they started a business in order to give themselves a little bit more autonomy so that they weren't under control of somebody else. And their first thought was like, I have to try to make this work, right? And then it's like, okay, now I have my first employee and I have to make payroll. But before they know it, now they have this really successful business, but they haven't really thought any more about what they want out of their business, other than the fact that at the beginning, I just wanted autonomy. And now I'm starting to get more and more of that, and there's money coming along with it. But I think so oftentimes the relationship that we have with them is helping them to take a step back and take like the 30,000-foot view and let them understand that maybe they have won the game. And if they've won the money game, like what can they do to make sure that they never have to win the money game again? And I think to your point, Thomas, like there's a lot of different avenues they could go about doing that. But I think so oftentimes they get so caught up in the weeds of the day to day. And I think this is true for probably us in our own businesses that you don't kind of come up for air, so to speak, and think about that. Whereas the relationships and the conversations that we're often having with clients is like we're helping them come up with air and think about that. And it's been a really eye-opening experience for me this year as we've worked with more and more successful business owners.
Yeah, I think that the next one that I want to hit on is that. So I think I probably work with like 60 plus business owner households. So I see a lot of different types of businesses. I will say my few richest clients, just net worth wise, owned or were C-level execs at somewhere that's like scaling, like SaaS type company, C Corp that not profitable for a very long time, eventually becomes profitable. You sell a bunch and get a lot of money. But there's very few of them. There's a few of those, but the next phase that are very wealthy clients are the ones that run more like service businesses. The more I work with business owners, the more that I know that I would always pick running a service business over any other type of business. It's so much easier. I think it's also the best stepping stone for somebody going from W-2 to run a business to then maybe run different businesses down the line, because it's like this middle ground, right? It's basically I run a job that I just have to do the business parts around me, and then I can slowly scale and add people. But most good service-based businesses are really just high profit machines, right? Like it's me and it's my team and I charge and everything left over comes back to me. And I think not only is it the easiest to run, but I think of the people who do it and do it well, you outsource all the roles that are lower than your hourly rate. You can still take home really good money. You get to enjoy your life. You can pick your schedule, blah, blah, blah. I think I learned and reinforced this year that like if I'm choosing to run a business, I would pick some type of service business every single day of the week.
So I would add to that. And Michael Girdley, who we had on the podcast earlier this year, had this incredible post on Twitter. So if you follow him, go back and check this post out. But he talks about this concept of if you were starting a business, essentially start a very I don't know what the term he used, but essentially a low risk business. And a service business is an incredible example of that
You're
because
not going to be out of a bunch of money, right? You're going to
yeah,
lose.
you're not putting up a bunch of money. And I think the other thing to think about is, you mentioned your wealthiest clients are people that oftentimes they weren't making money in their business for a really long time. They're building this enterprise value. In a service-based business, like you can cash flow the business, and frankly, you should be cash flowing the business pretty quickly. And if you're not cash flowing the business pretty quickly, like you
Quick.
need to think about like how you're running the business, how you're potentially getting new clients, things like that. But I think it's an incredible way to start because you can learn a lot of the business aspects along the way. And the analogy I always use is like it's way better to stub your toe than to break your leg, especially at the beginning.
Yeah.
And secondarily, you don't have to have some amazing, perfect timing, perfect outcome, perfect interest rate environment for you to sell your business for this perfect amount of money. You could just never sell it. It could just be your thing. This is what I do. I enjoy doing it. And you can really control those levers.
Yeah. No, I mean, I totally agree. I think the other thing that I would say, about this that I don't know, I mean, I think it's pretty much interesting on this is that like the people are scared to hire. That was what I found. I actually tweeted about this a couple weeks ago and somebody was like, "Oh, I've always heard that you should wait as long as you possibly can to hire, like don't rush into hiring." And I think the exact opposite. I think every time I've been like, "Should I hire? Should I not?" A mentor has been like, "You should hire before you're ready to hire. I promise you it's going to be good." And I'm like, "Oh, fine. Like it's going to be it's going to be on my budget. Like I hire them. I know they're going to start." And then all of a sudden my business blows up. It's happened to me every single time where like if I didn't hire them, I would have never been able to manage where the business went. And as I talk to my clients, the same thing happens to them. It's this crazy thing that as soon as you outsource other areas and you give yourself more time to do what you're really good at, those high level things, the things that are really going to grow the business, it's going to work, right? And if you can just put a bunch of A players in the spots where they're A at versus you doing everything, your business is going to become the best it possibly can.
All right. So to add to that idea, one of the other things that I think I've learned this year is just because you're good at making money and just because you are good at running a business does not mean that you're good at personal finance. And that is okay. And it's okay to admit that. And I think some of the most successful business owners that we work with would happily admit that personal finance and the ins and outs of tax planning and investment strategies and what accounts they should contribute to and when they should contribute to them and what should go in there is not their area of expertise. And just like you hire somebody in your business, one of the things that I've seen business owners be able to do is like they are able to outsource some of these tasks, right? It's like the reason why we have jobs, right? Because they outsource their personal financial life to us. And just because you're good at potentially running a P&L inside your business doesn't mean you're really good at the personal financial life and connecting the success that your business has had to the success that you want to have in your personal financial life.
I totally agree. Um, what's the next one that you have?
I think one thing I've learned is, I think this has been an iterative process for me over like 15 years of investing. But, I always see this, I think it's like this meme on Twitter. Rachel Camp posted every once in a while where it's this idea that like, I know nothing, I'm going to invest in index funds. I know everything. And then you revert back to like, I know nothing, I'm going to invest in index funds. It's like this big circle that you go in. And look, I'm not saying everybody should invest in index funds. In fact, I think there's a better way to invest than just index funds, but that's not the point. The point is simple and keeping things simple is beautiful and it works. And I don't care how much money you have, there is no secret sauce that's like around the corner when you hit $10 million or $20 million or $30 million. Now, look, you might be able to allocate a little bit more money towards higher risk investments because you could potentially lose that money and still live your lifestyle. But one of the biggest mistakes I think people think is that when they hit a certain level of net worth, that there's going to be some sort of investment that's now available to them that's going to get them such outsized returns for the risk that they're taking. And that's just inherently not true. Like, if you think that's true, look at the rates of return of hedge funds that are charging 2 and 20 that have huge minimums. Like, they're typically not beating the market. Now, they're playing a little bit different game, so we could talk about that. But like, there's an idea that I just think there's no such thing as a perfect portfolio, but to me, the perfect portfolio is the one that you're able to stick with. Typically, the one you're able to stick with is pretty simple.
Totally. No, I completely agree. And going along these lines, I think one of the most important frames for people to look through and to implement in their investment life is liquidity. I think, now working with, I think the lower wealth or middle class, like liquidity is actually not an issue. They maybe have retirement accounts and then they don't really do private investments. Maybe they do some real estate, but like now as people become wealthy, they do so much into private equity and businesses their friends bring to them. They do so much into real estate and they just have all of this wealth with a lack of liquidity, and it's not worth it. It's so much more stressful being in a situation where you don't have all of these accessible funds. Like half the time it's like, oh, I want to start this new business, but I don't have the liquidity for it. Or like all of a sudden you have a surprise bill that comes up and you might be 5 million net worth, but none of it is really liquid to you and you're stressed. And the most stressed clients I have are the ones that are wealthy, but don't have liquidity.
Hmm. What's your next one?
Next one is, I think this is something that was reinforced to me after like I actually work with some financial advisors on financial planning. I now have a new client. I work with a bunch of tax people. I'm working with a newer client now who he owns CPA and bookkeeping practices. And, we're getting ready to meet with him. We're like, dude, where's your books? And he's like, oh, like they're not done very well. I'm like, you're a bookkeeping firm. And he's like, yeah, well, I do that we use somebody else. I don't want my team to know it. I'm like, what about tax planning? And like, he's like, yeah, I don't really do any tax planning. I'm like, and I see this with advisors too. Like, it doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how much you think about money, like you live your life, right? As a business owner, most people are so busy running their business, so busy in their life with their family, so busy just actually trying to get time to be able to relax and get away that they don't do the right things for their finances on a yearly basis. Like they're not even doing the base level, bare minimum right, let alone all of the best things. And, I've surveyed a lot of my clients, and I think the one thing that we've really gotten right is we are on top of our clients for everything, right? Nothing falls through the cracks. We force meetings, we force them to get the info, and they're like, hey, I just like, this seems like a lot of work. It's like, well, then we're not working with you. If you're not willing to do the work to get everything organized so we can help you do the right things. And I think where I walk away from this is people really wouldn't do any of the right things if they didn't have an accountability partner and somebody telling them what to do. Like time and time again, I have these conversations and people are like, sat down with my CPA or whatever person, and they're like, here's the things you could do. And they're like, so they never do anything because there's no clear action. There's no way to get to a decision. There's no accountability to get that decision done. And I think if you really think about where a financial advisor becomes valuable for business owners, it's just that it first starts with what do I make? What do I spend? What do I owe in taxes? What's left over? And then it all goes down to now help me decide what to do with it and then make sure that gets done. And I think if we weren't there for 99% of people, they wouldn't be getting any of those things done.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times people know they might even know what to do, and maybe even they know how to do it. But the reality is, like Monday through Friday happens, and maybe on the weekends they're working on their business, or they're hanging out with their family, or they're taking their kids to soccer practice. And before you know it, like tax season's around the corner, and the end of the year is coming up, and I haven't done anything, and I haven't planned around this. I'm not really sure what's happening, or nobody's even educated me on what I should be thinking about. And that's where I just think the accountability of having somebody that can make sure that you're staying on track with the things that, even if you know you're supposed to be doing those things,
Yeah.
just staying on track with them is so key.
Yeah. I think the other one I'll say is that, like, I just don't think business owners plan for the negatives enough, right? They like think about how everything goes perfectly. They plan for all the fun things, but they don't strategize and get organized around the things that aren't fun, right? That could be estate planning. It could be liability protections. It could be all the insurance, different types of things. It could even just be like bringing on a new partner that you don't really know and is probably not going to be a right fit, right? Like they don't think about what happens if your partner passes away. Like we're just not really wired to want to think about the negatives, but we're wired to think that okay, I hear about them, but that doesn't apply to me, even though statistically it does. And so I think you know we had that last episode with Crosby, and one of the things that he talked about in his book is like taking the worst case scenario off the table. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, maybe what he's saying is like the worst case doesn't happen. So like let's stop being stuck in the worst case. But no, no, no. What he was talking about here is that think about the absolute worst case and how do you get rid of that from happening, right? So like worst case scenario is I lose my job and I can't find work for 12 months. Like that could happen. How do I protect that? Right? Or like, oh my gosh, what happens if my daughter on the way home from school today gets in a car accident and kills somebody? Right? Like, am I protected? Have I done the right things? And I think a lot of good personal finance is what is the worst thing that could happen? And did I protect against that?
Mm. I think the other thing that I've learned this year is that the only way that you can make a good decision on something and feel good afterwards about making a decision on that when it comes to anything with personal finances, like how you choose to invest your money, what insurance coverages you end up buying, how your estate plan's done, is you have to be educated on it. Because I would say 90+% of our clients come from working with a previous advisory relationship. Some of those relationships are doing some stuff right. Some of them I feel like are in a pretty good spot. But oftentimes, the thing that resonates with them is they feel like they're getting better educated on what they're doing and why they're doing what they're doing. So they could have been doing almost all the right stuff beforehand, to be honest with you, but nobody's ever told them why they're doing what they're doing. And I think this is something that has been a learning for me. And if you're listening and you're potentially looking at an advisor, I would ask them, like, how are you going to help educate me on what solutions and strategies I should do? Because I do think there's an element of like, Thomas and I, we spend a ton of time and effort learning about all the strategies, implementing the strategies, and we are going to come to the table with an idea or solution that we feel like is the best for you. But at the same time, like, it's also our job to educate them and educate you as the end client on, like, why it's the best in your specific situation. And, oh, by the way, we looked at these other 3 options, and this is the reason why this one is the best. So, for me, I think it just goes back to, if you're gonna make a decision around personal finance, feel good about that decision long term, you need to make sure that you're feeling educated around why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah. And maybe the last one that I want to hit on, which goes hand in hand with this, is I think for most people, they're probably scared to let people know they don't know most things as it relates to
Mm,
finance. And one thing that I always start with my clients is I'm like, I'm going to talk to you like your baseline in finance is extremely low, like where you basically know nothing. If I'm talking and you're like, please go past this, I know what it means, tell me. And you know what I found? It doesn't matter what wealth range people are, they don't know. They really don't know. Like maybe they know a little bit about budgeting, and then like all of a sudden you have a client who knows like about some really complex tax strategy or something, or maybe they know about investing because they're in private equity, but they don't know the baseline conversation. I was talking to one of my clients, he's 30 plus million net worth. He has all these complex things set up. And I brought up a backdoor Roth and he was lost. And then I talked to somebody else very wealthy, and I talked to them about a solo 401k, and they couldn't understand like mega backdoor and backdoor Roth IRA and pro rata rule and all these things, right? And like I get that isn't basic, but like what I found is like people just don't have a very good baseline financial knowledge, right? And so like my most important thing is like let's level set. Like just tell me that you don't know, because I don't want to do anything or recommend anything that you can't tell me at least why we're doing it. You might not understand the name of the pro rata rule and what it is, but you understand why your IRA has to have zero and why doing the backdoor Roth and getting tax-free growth is important. But for some reason, I just assumed early in my life that wealthy people knew a lot about money, and all it means is that they're better earners. That's it.
mhm. Well, I think that's a great way to wrap up the show today, because when I think about this podcast in general, and I think about the long game, like, our goal this entire year has been to try to help you get smarter with your money, to try to educate you on a bunch of different topics that Thomas and I see every day. And I hope that's the case. So if you're listening, make sure you like and subscribe, and we look forward to seeing you on a future episode.